morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are around the world. My name is Ayman Tarabishi, and I play multiple hats, but let me start with this one for this webinar. I am the Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the GW School of Business at George Washington University. I am delighted that you all are here. I am also the President and CEO of the International Council for Small Business. And this webinar is a double webinar, and since it plays two roles here. One for the GW School of Business, Department of Management. This is one of our esteemed colleagues in our department, and this is one of the first webinars we go global with, and on the new Neurology of Leadership with Dr. James Bailey. And this is also part of the ICSB and exchange webinar series that we go global with monthly here. So we decided to bring them both together here, and we're delighted to have this webinar here today with Dr. James Bailey. The title of the webinar today is The New Neurology of Leadership. And Dr. James Bailey is the Hochberg Fellow of Leadership at the Department of Management, the GW School of Business. And we'll get into a little bit about the webinar here, but first I want to introduce Dr. James Bailey and welcome him to our webinar series here. Dr. James Bailey is a professor of leadership development at the George Washington University School of Business and a fellow in the Center of Management Development at London Business School. He has taught at the University of Michigan, New York University, IMD, and the Helsinki School of Economics. Dr. Bailey is the recipient of several teaching distinctions or awards, including 4 GWSB Outstanding Faculty Awards, and I can recognize them. He's one of the best faculty members in the School of Business. In 2006, and this is just absolutely amazing, and we are very proud of this, he was named one of the world's top 10 executive educators by the International Council for Executive Leadership Development. He has published more than 50 academic papers and case studies, and is the author of 5 books, including the award-winning best-selling Organization and Managerial Wisdom and the forthcoming Lessons on Leadership. He has designed and delivered hundreds of executive programs for firms like Nestle, UBS, ConocoPhillips, and Goldman Sachs, as well as several major law firms and the US Congress. And very prestigious and professor with a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom, and which leads us to today's webinar, The New Neurology of Leadership. And the title itself sounds a little bit scary, The Neurology of Leadership, but at its core is the human element, which is harmony and trying to kind of handle the COVID-19 pandemic now and moving in the future, and its effects on us that we don't realize how it has impacted us. Dr. Bailey, we are delighted to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I know you did the GW October conference, and when I saw the presentation, I said, we need to do this, but we need to bring it out to the global audience here. So why don't we start off and just tell us a little bit about you, just more than what I've read, and just so people get to know you, and then we'll get into the topic itself and the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayman, and thanks to the ICSB. I'm not going to thank you for the introduction because I think that sets expectations too high. I think the best thing you do is say, okay, here's this guy that I kind of know, and maybe you'll enjoy this, I don't know. And then, you know, it's going to be a lot easier to deliver because you don't feel like any expectations will be punctured. However, I hope that I can deliver on all of those different expectations. I've actually been studying leadership since I was really kind of a boy. My dad, my grandfather was in World War I and had many stories to tell about the trenches in Europe. My dad was in World War II and he was in the Pacific Theater. And so I was surrounded by these stories growing up of heroic leadership. And so I got interested at a very young age. And I started actually for a while to try to make music metaphors to try to better understand leadership. And of course, my first instinct as a young man was that leadership was like rock and roll. And when I dug into that, that didn't make sense because really at the end of the day, rock and roll is about anarchy. Right? And that's not what leadership is about. I thought about classical music. But then it struck me that there's a very strict hierarchy in classical music, that there is the conductor, and that you out there, the symphony members, whether you're on a violin or a flute or a timbre or whatever it happened to be, you had to do exactly what he or she, the conductor, said. And that didn't seem to hit me right about what leadership was either. And so then I started thinking about jazz music. And as I got a little bit older, I became a great jazz fan and still am. And I think that I like jazz is the right metaphor to describe it, because what jazz music does is it's improv. It's different every single time it plays. It gets passed on to the different players in the band, and let's say there's a drummer and a bass player and a sax player and a piano player, and one of them might start and go for 36 bars, okay, and then pass it over, but they might go for 42 bars. They might go for 30 bars. And so you don't know when the music is coming to you. And so there has to be this feel between these people, almost an intimacy, and they have to be able to communicate with just nods of the head. And when that sax player is passing it over to the piano player, they have to have returned to a point where the piano player can begin to build seamlessly on what that previous musician does, go and soar individually, then come back, pass it off, and now became a team player. And that seemed to me to be a better way to think about leadership, is that at one moment you're in the front, soaring individuality, you're using your innovation, you're using your ideas, you're using your creativity, and you're pushing things forward in a unique way, but in a way that's also consistent with the overarching goal of everyone that's in the in this collective, in this band, in this department, in this unit, in this product launch, in this small business, in whatever it happens to be. You're moving things forward with your own expertise, but with them in mind. And when it's time for you to step back and no longer be a leader, you pass that leadership on to someone else. You prepare them to be a leader. Then you pass it on to someone else, and now you step back and you support them, and you fall into a follower relationship. And so that seemed to make a lot of sense. This idea that at 1 minute we're leaders and 1 minute we're followers is another way to think about leadership, because we tend to think about it in kind of hierarchical terms, that there's this larger than life character up there who is charismatic and strong-willed, and we're always following him or her regardless. And that doesn't seem to match on to what the real world needs. And I don't think what small business needs. I don't think what entrepreneurship needs. You got 5 people in a room trying to build a new company. Each one of them is going to have a different expertise. And when it comes to the hardware or the software or the mathematics side, which might not be your specialty, you've got to let someone else lead. And so I want to kind of just start with that, with a bit of a discussion. And now I want to make another proposition about leadership before we kind of move on to some slides and a formal presentation. And that proposition is that to understand leadership, we have to start at the individual level, the psychological level. You know what? You don't lead an organization. Nobody leads an organization. You lead people. An organization doesn't have free will. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have volition. An organization does what people tell it to do. And of course, all an organization is a legal structure with certain rights and obligations under the law. Okay, so organizations don't do anything. Organizations don't make decisions. They don't make ethical decisions. They don't make unethical decisions. People do those things. Okay? And to turn it, you don't lead an organization, you lead people. And so to me, the research on leadership that starts at that high level and says, we're going to talk about how to lead ConocoPhillips or Goldman Sachs or whatever it happens to be, just missed it. I'm actually trained as a psychologist. So the way that I look at the world is at what we would call micro level. Okay. In this case, the person level, the psychological level, the team level, maybe the social psychology level. And so as I go through this presentation, I want to emphasize that. Just let you know that's where they're going. That's what's most important to us. So I'm going to share some slides here. You guys, anytime, pop in on chat. I'm going to try to keep my eyes on the chat as much as possible. And here is this one. Sure. Sometimes it takes a second to come up. And this one is not coming up. So I saw that a little earlier. Okay. Okay, there we go. Yep, that's the right one. And everybody see it? Okay, yeah, Lyman. Okay, thank you very much. And let me get my chat up so that I can see everybody's chat as it comes along. Okay. All right, so the new neurology of leadership and why that title is just that over the last really 30 years or so, we have two technologies that have come online that have now become commonplace. They were quite radical when they first came around. And those two technologies are positron emission topography, PET scans, and CAT scans. And what these have allowed us to do is to see into the human brain and to see what areas of the human brain are active when they are presented with particular stimuli. Now, those stimuli could be auditory, what you hear. They could be olfactory, what you smell. It could be occipital, what you see. They could be tactile, what you feel. Okay? It could be any of those sensory inputs. And those sensory inputs then have to be processed neurologically. And so now we know what area of the brain is active when we're presented with those. I'll give you an example of a stimuli, a sentence, okay? Here's a sentence. I am speaking a sentence to you, right? That is being processed neurologically. Now we know exactly where that is being processed and the neurochemicals that are being released when you process this. So if I say something like, hey, it's really nice to see you, or man, Ayman, you are looking fabulous, right? I mean, so that last statement makes Ayman feel good, right? He hears it. We all like it when people compliment it, and it releases a little bit of dopamine or maybe norepinephrine into his system, and it makes him feel good, right? We all like that. Or if I said, Ayman, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard in my life, okay? Now, he hears it, he processes it, but there's a different neurochemical dump that takes place, right? So this is what we can do now. This is what we can understand with the brain, and it's really fascinating. Some amazing research has come from this. And so here's my core idea that I'm going to work with here, and is that leadership is an emotional relationship, that the primary way that leadership impacts us, it touches us, it lifts us, it inspires us, it enables us, it ennobles us, whatever word it is you want to use, is that leadership is an emotional relationship. That's what we remember. That's what has its impact. And so because we can now see in the brain, because we can see the areas of the brain that process emotion, which have their own neurochemicals that they tend to release, and now we can connect some things that really are clearly leadership, and I'm going to tell you about these as we go on, to emotion. I'm starting to believe that this is where we have to focus on. Now, you've all heard the term emotional intelligence before, right? It's a very, very popular term. And I'm not really talking about that, okay? Emotional intelligence is basically a four-prong skill-based that allows one to be more sensitive and more aware of their social setting, more sensitive in engaging that social setting, in other words, relationship management, more aware of their own emotional tendencies, and more, therefore, aware of their ability to modulate their own emotional tendencies. Very good stuff, terrific. It's a little bit of old wine in a new bottle. Nevertheless, that's not what I'm talking about, okay? I'm going someplace else with this research. Okay, so to first off think about leadership, we have to ask this question. And I want you guys, I'm going to make these slides available to folks.
Yes, we are. Yep.
Good, good. So I want you guys to go back to this because this is an important question. I think that this is the ultimate question in all of leadership is why should anybody want to follow you? Okay, notice the word want is underlined. And notice that I don't have in this sentence, why should anyone have to follow you? Right? That question doesn't interest me. Why should anybody have to follow you? That doesn't interest me. We all have to do that, right? You have to do what your boss tells you to do or else you can't keep your job. Okay. That question, why should anybody have to follow me, is answered by the organizational chart. Okay. And I just don't find that interesting, right? We all have to be have to follow someone. That includes the CEO, right? The CEO has a board of directors, and the board of directors has the authority to fire him or her anytime they want. Okay. And so, but this is the question I'm interested. Why should anybody want? And let's think about that word want, right? What does that imply to you? It implies motivation. It implies instrumentalism. It implies intentionality. I want to follow this person. It implies emotion. You want to follow them because they excite you. You want to follow them because they're going to help you reach your goals, and your goals are important to you, and your goals are your values. That's what your goals are. Your goals are just values. I value having money. I value having discretion. Okay. And that's just emotion. Okay, so this is a question about emotion. So I really think, and when I run executive workshops, we spend about a half a day on this question. And I make people go away and write down very carefully, why should anybody want to follow them? And then we come back and we talk about it. Then people go into small groups and they talk about it. And then, so this question is actually really, really a complex question. And then here's the other sort of corollary to this, is that we choose our teachers. Excuse me, our teachers. We choose our leaders based on how they make us feel. See, you don't choose your boss. You don't choose your family, right? They're just assigned to you. There's nothing you can do about it, but you choose your friends and you choose your leaders. That leader might be your boss, and bless you if that's the case. Right? Bless you if your leader is your boss. Terrific for you. Okay, that's absolutely wonderful. But our leaders we choose, and we might choose them from somebody who's superior to us. We might choose them as a peer. We might choose them as someone who reports to us in the organization. We might even choose a leader who's outside of the organization. The point here is that we're not assigned our leaders, and that when we choose them based on how they make us feel. So let's take a little neurology lesson, a little walk down neurology lane. Some of this, some of you will remember from your earlier studies. Some of you, you won't. This will be new to you. But yes, this is your brain. Okay. That's your brain. And yes, that's your brain on my PowerPoint. For those of you old enough to remember the TV commercials. All right, so there's really three primary areas of the brain. The brain is oftentimes called the tripartite brain, meaning it's got three parts to it, okay? This tan area in the middle here is called the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain is called that because it's basically identical to the brain in a reptile. And it processes low-level functions, critical functions, don't get me wrong, but low-level functions. So this is the area of the brain that tells the body to breathe. This is the area of the brain that controls eye blinks. This is the area of the brain that reacts when we touch something hot or something freezing cold. This is the area of the brain that controls perspiration and galvanic skin response. All very important stuff. We have to have this stuff to live. If there is damage to your reptilian brain, you're in trouble. Okay, you're in trouble. But that's not necessarily of interest to us. So we're pretty much going to leave the reptilian brain now. And we're going to go to this purple area here around that surrounds the reptilian brain. And this is called the mammalian brain. And it's called the mammalian brain because all mammals have this in their brain structure. It's also called the limbic lobe. So I'm going to be referring to it as the limbic lobe. And you can see the little, the words in there pointing the line into the purple area. Now, this is the area of the brain that controls emotions. Anytime you're feeling something emotional, it is because of this area of the brain. Okay? This area of the brain, whether you felt something, you heard something, you smelled something, you thought something, whatever it was, this is the area of the brain that releases the chemicals that give us emotion. So if it's a good emotion, because I told Iman, he's looking fabulous, okay, this area of the brain is going to release, again, dopamine or norepinephrine, okay? And those are the things that make you feel good. Those are the things that make you feel happy. Those are the things that make you feel energized. That's what happens there. And then all this other area of the brain, okay? The blue area, the green area, the orange area, and down here below the red area, that's called the neocortex. And when you and I think of the brain, that's normally how we think of it, right? We think of the thinking centers of the brain, right? So this is where language is processed. In the Wernicke area, this is where language is produced in the Broca area of the brain. And so this is where all those higher order, complex problem solving functioning is taking place. Now, one way to think about this is the difference between the limbic lobe, the emotion centers, and the neocortex, the thinking centers, is just that. The limbic has to do with feeling, and the neocortex has to do with thinking. Another way to think about it, the limbic lobe has to do with emotion, and the neocortex has to do with cognition. So now with those things in mind, let's move through a couple things that we have found in the last 20 years or so. The first thing is emotional primacy. Now, what emotional primacy means is that every sensory neuron system in the human body, everything is first processed by the emotion center of the brain before being passed on to the cognitive centers of the brain. Okay? So everything, something you see, something you feel, something that touches you, whatever, your first response is the limbic lobe, because that's where all of those sensory receptors head up to, all those nerve endings. They first go to the limbic area before then being passed on to the neocortex. The implication of this is that we feel before we think. We feel before we think. There's no question about this. This is not a matter of debate, right? This is just hardcore science. We feel our first reaction to anything is an emotional reaction. So the next time somebody tells you they're just going to go away and sit and think about this in a cool and calm manner, that's not possible. Okay, that's just not possible. They can't do that. Now, the reason for this is kind of a survival value. Because, I mean, imagine this scenario that you hear something loud and you go, I think I will investigate. And you turn and bam, whatever it is, a shutter is falling off a building or whatever it is. Where if it's being processed emotionally first, you hear that loud noise, you jump, right? and your body's looking around, so you're in like a fight or flight mode. And so the idea here is that for us to survive as a species, our first reaction needs to be emotional because it prepares us to deal with potential danger, fight or flight. And the neurochemical that the limbic lobe is releasing is called cortisol. And that dumps into your system. You just feel it. It's energetic, but energetic not in a good way. Energetic in sort of a panicky way. So I think that makes sense. So now let's look at this next one, neural hijacking. What this means is that there's more connections going from the limbic lobe to the cognitive centers of the brain than there are connections going from the cognitive centers of the brain back to the limbic lobe. So in other words, there's more communication happening from emotion to cognition than there is from cognition down to emotion. More connections going from feeling to thinking than there are connections going from thinking to feeling. Well, what this leads to is what's sometimes called one-way communication or neural hijacking. We can be hijacked by our emotions because our emotions can overwhelm our cognitive centers because there's so much more getting passed to those cognitive centers from the emotional centers than from the cognitive centers back to the emotional centers. And just give you an example of this. Have any of you ever been in love? Okay, and especially I like to think about the crazy love, because almost all of us have had one crazy love in our life, maybe more, okay? One crazy love in our life that was crazy. There was no reason we should have been in this. This wasn't good for us. And all of our friends knew it. And they told us, dude, this is not going to work for you. She's not the right person for you, or he's not the right person for you. And we get all mad at him and say, oh, what do you mean? That's the love of my life. That's my soulmate. How dare you talk to me that way? Okay. And then crazy loves never work. Okay. So the crazy love gets split up at some point, and then we kind of come around and we go, oh my God, how lucky I was for not getting caught in the middle of this. And it's the reason why is you got overwhelmed by your emotion. And it took away your sense of reason. Now, I think that's probably especially an important thing to point out when we're talking about entrepreneurs, right? Because an entrepreneur gets this idea and they get all ramped up with this idea. Oh, sure, they write a business plan. I know that. But they're just carried away with the charge that the idea gives them. And then when they go into the bank or to the PE firm or the investment bankers or whoever, the venture capitalist or whoever, and say, we got this great idea. They're looking at it going, not so great. And the entrepreneur doesn't understand why they don't see it. And it's because they've been overwhelmed emotionally. Okay, so let's go to the second one of these, emotional contagion. So one of the things we know now is that we don't just identify the emotions of other people, but we feel the emotions of other people. So I can look at Iman and say, okay, Iman's in a good mood. And generally, Iman is in a good mood. He's a very positive man. And I can see that. But being with Iman actually makes me feel like I'm in a good mood. So his emotion is contagious. They sometimes call the emotional system, in the limbic system, the interpersonal limbic system, because it's not that you can just see it or identify with it, but you feel it. Now, by the other token, if Iman's a little irritated, I'm going to probably feel a little irritated. If he looks uncertain, I'm probably going to feel a little uncertain. And there's been a lot of beautiful studies that demonstrate this. I'm not going to go into them. So it's important to note that, and particularly the dominant person in the room is the one who is contagious. Again, not COVID contagious here, folks, but emotionally contagious, right? And it's usually the dominant person in the room. And who's the dominant person in the room? The boss. Okay. Or in the case of when I'm teaching face to face, I'm the dominant person in the room. Okay? And the students can pick up my emotions, not just see them, feel them. So this is an enormous source of power for a leader. An enormous source of power for a leader. You can not just affect how people are thinking about something, but you can affect how they're feeling about it. Whoa. Okay, now we're really starting to get into this. Right? We're really starting to get into how these things are connected. The next one, which is my one.
James, just are you? We're still stuck on the slide, emotion and neuroscience. Are you forwarding your slides or?
Nope, that's just all on this slide.
Okay, very good.
Okay. So moving here, can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay. Positive emotions. It turns out that being in a good mood is really important for good performance. We are not at our best when we are in a bad mood. Okay. We are at our best when we are in a positive emotional state. There's something about being in a positive state that becomes like an intellectual lubricant. Different parts of the mind, of the neocortex, work better with one another and more seamlessly when that limbic lobe is helping us be in a positive state, because it's releasing those nice chemicals that I've talked about that we really like. So not only are we in a positive state, okay, but what that does is it helps all of the other cognitive centers to work better with one another. It also helps us be more charitable, better citizens, to have more hope about the future. And that's important, right? There was one study that had people, when they came out of a movie, they had like the United Way standing there, you know, gathering contributions, donations to the United Way. And if people were coming out of the Deer Hunter, they didn't put much money in there, right? Because they're not feeling very hopeful. They're not in a good mood. Okay, they're feeling like life is pretty crappy right now and that there's no hope. And so why do anything? Now you do the same thing to people coming out of the movie Forrest Gump. Everybody is donating money because they're feeling good. They're feeling positive. They're feeling like we can overcome adversity. Even the simplest person, like Forrest Gump, can overcome uncertainty and tough times and difficult situations and death and all of these other things. And so they're more than willing to give. So people in a good mood are more charitable. So that means Ayman and I, you know, we work together. And if I'm just taken down for something's happened in my life, I'm a little depressed, I don't have much energy. You know what Ayman's going to do? And he's done this before for me. He steps up and says, James, I'll take care of that. Don't worry about it. I got it. Okay, you just take it easy, you just recover. That's organizational citizenship. That's being charitable. People in positive moods are more likely to do that. Okay? And that's important. Organizations don't get along without that sort of thing. People in a good mood, when presented with a problem, come up with more solutions, more creative solutions, and more effective solutions. People in a positive mood are more have improved memory and improved recall. Those are slightly different things. I won't dig into them. And people in a good mood are better able to do things like detect patterns of covariation in data plots. So they can look at just, you know, a board, a PowerPoint slide full of dots on there and ask the question, do you see a pattern? And they are better able to identify a pattern than people in a bad mood. So here we go, folks. Job number one as a leader is creating a positive emotional tone. That is your major job every day, is to create that positive emotional tone, because now not only do you have people who want to go to work, Okay, remember our previous slide? Why should anybody want to follow you? Well, here's one of the reasons. You create a positive emotional climate. It's a nice place to be. It's a nice place to work. People like going into the office because they feel good there. They feel accepted there. They feel like they've got some psychological safety there. They feel acknowledged there. They feel affirmed there because you're creating that climate. And because you are the dominant person in the room, you're the leader, you're the manager, you're the boss, they're picking up your emotions. So you're in a good mood, they're in a good mood. And you've got to fight with this. Believe me, this is a burden. Make no mistake about it. This is a burden because you know what? Sometimes even Iman feels a little crappy, right? And Iman's feeling down and Iman's a little depressed, a little confused, a little worried. You know what Iman has to do? Iman has to stow that. He can't show that because that's affecting everybody in his group and they're not going to work as well that day. So it's hard. This is a lot of self-emotional modulation that can be really, really difficult. So let's move to the next one, neurogenesis. And this is my favorite. It turns out that even in adulthood, you and I can grow brand new. Let me see. Let me do a question here. I just saw this pop up. Is there a gender difference in the size of the limbic lobe and or number of connections between the limbic and neocortex? One direction or the other? Is there a gender difference? There are slight gender differences here, but none that really should affect what we're talking about. Okay? And that's mainly within and not between different parts of the neocortex. And I don't like to get into this because it's very, very easy to anything you say, somebody to take it one way and somebody else to take it another. So I think that that's a question for another person and for another time. But thank you for the question. It is an important question. And I would point out, by the way, that this is different for everybody, not just between the genders. Right? It's just like some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us have broader shoulders, some of us have blue eyes, some of us have green eyes. It doesn't make any difference. So all of us, our brains are wired slightly differently. We all have different central nervous systems. And it's going to be the same thing here. Some people are a little bit more skilled at language. And that doesn't mean we can't all get better at language production. But some people might be more skilled at language production because those areas of their brains tend to have a higher concentration of what are called dendritic connections. And so somebody else might have a particular, and you've seen this. I mean, I've gone places with people whose eyes are so good. They're like, oh, do you see that blue jay? Do you see this? Do you see that? Do you see that? I mean, I looked over there and I didn't see the blue jay. They did. Now, maybe they worked on this because they're a bird watcher. I understand. But one possible explanation is that their occipital processing capabilities are a little better than mine. That's okay. That's okay too. Again, your brain's like any other organ in your body. You can have a really strong heart that's going to beat, in a perfect rhythm for 89 years. You might have a heart that isn't so strong, and it is going to need some sort of intervention when you're in your 60s. That's just genetic stuff. But I don't like talking about some of the gender stuff at this point. And when I teach leadership in other ways, there's some really, really solid research to talk about some gender differences. And mainly those gender differences go into social expectations and rearing practices. So those are things I'm not going to address now. But let's go back to neurogenesis, that you and I can develop brand new neural tissues even as adults. Now, that is amazing, okay? Because I don't know about you, I've been told my whole life that all I'm doing is killing brain cells. Every time I drink a beer, somebody somewhere in my ear was my Irish mother telling me, all you're doing, boy, is drinking, killing brain cells. So this is really good news for any of us that had too much fun in college. And, but this is prevented from happening to the extent a substance called cortisol is present in our system. And cortisol is the neurochemical that the brain releases when we're under stress. Okay, so cortical is what happens when the limbic lobe is feels threatened in some way, and it dumps cortisol through the rest of the body. Right? And as we said a little bit earlier, that's very important from a survival perspective. We need that cortisol to prepare us for a potential emergency and for things that might be putting us in jeopardy from a survival perspective. Right? But so the stuff gets dumped out there, and it takes as long as 6 hours to flush cortisol from our system once it has been released. And it prevents us from connecting, growing that new neural tissue. Okay? See, when you learn something, it's not just that it got stored away somewhere. Two dendrites, right, which is basically tissue within the brain, come together and now have a connection where in between them, electrical signals are passed. That's what happens when you learn something new. This is prevented from happening to the extent cortisol is present in your system. So this goes to another leadership lesson, both leading yourself and leading other people. Okay? You need to find ways to flush this toxic chemical from your system quicker and more efficiently. You need to get this stuff out of you as soon as possible. Okay, this is this is garbage. This is nuclear waste. You need to get it out of yourself as quickly as possible. So in chat, why don't you guys tell me real quick some things that you think can be done, just real common sense stuff that can be done to help move this out of your system quicker. Sports, good. I'm just gonna call that exercise. 10 minutes, walking for 10 minutes, breathing, meditation, breathing slowly, deep breathing, meditation, and spiritual connections. Good. Okay, so far, okay, 1,000 steps. So somebody's wearing their Fitbit. Writing, journaling, good. Good. Okay. Speaking to someone, getting support, doing a hobby. Excellent, Miriam. Excellent. Okay. All right. I mean, you guys have come up with some really important ones. Let me go back and kind of take a look at them. I think it started with sports, and then we had people just saying go for walks and so forth. It's just exercise. Exercise, folks, exercise. Even as little as 10 minutes a day. The American Medical Association came out with their new recommendations about 2 years ago that said 10 minutes a day goes a long way. Okay, you don't have to run 5 miles. You don't have to run 10 miles. Okay, 10 minutes a day, brisk walk. And I see Hans also came up here with that exact number, 10 minutes, makes a huge difference. All exercise does is increase your metabolism. And when your metabolism increases, that means it more efficiently processes anything you put in your body. Okay, and that could be extracting nutrients from a banana, and that can be moving cortisol through your system quicker. So exercise. Now, Jennifer says a walk in the nature, and she's probably talking about more than just a walk here, right? She's talking about a place, nature. That helps to remove you, from the office, from the city, from the car and the commute, from your home. And God knows you love your home and you love your children and you love all that, but getting out there by yourself in a quiet setting and being able to see that this completely different kind of foliage and view, it has a psychological effect on you, right? It's called environmental psychology, and it's been pretty well established. Breathing, meditation, that came up with a lot of different people. Exactly right. I used to not be a fan of this transcendental meditation stuff. Transcendental meditation stuff. I used to not like it. I thought it was some sort of hippie stuff that didn't really make any difference. It turns out it does. It turns out it really does. Meditation works. And again, for as little as 10 minutes a day, that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do is lay down, and either if you can do it yourself, great, or there are tons of apps these days, right? Tons of apps. I use Headspace. And for any of you that use Headspace, I particularly like the voice of Andy because I just find it to be a very soft, soothing kind of voice. And it works. I wake up. I don't wake up. I mean, I get up after 10 minutes and I feel better. Okay? I just feel better. And by the way, prayer and meditation have exactly the same effect. So if you're moved a little bit more toward the religious side, prayer is perfectly good here. And I think it was Miriam who threw in there in spiritual connections. So then we've got exercise, reflection, journaling. Yep, those are things that kind of take you away where you're thinking about your day in a dispassionate way and not in a judgmental way. What happened, and again, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Yushabel, writing it down is really important. One of the differences between extraordinary practitioners and mediocre practitioners is the habit of reflection. And that's what you're doing when you're journaling. You are reflecting on your day. It's kind of like a professional kind of a diary, if you will. And I have a paper under review on exactly this right at the moment. So hobbies, Miriam, very important. By the way, watching TV is not a hobby. Watching football is not a hobby. Those are not hobbies because they're passive. A hobby has to be something that you do. A hobby has to be something that draws you into it. So this could be crossword puzzles. This could be regular puzzle pieces. This could be collecting stamps. This could be cooking. This could be putting together airplane models. This could be a lot of different things, but it draws you away from the everyday and puts you in a different space. Dance and music, which we can put in a little bit into the area of exercise, but you can also imagine the release component of this, especially if you aren't too self-conscious about your dancing and you just get out and let it go. Transcendental meditation. Question, why would someone work better under stress? They don't work better under stress, Nina. That's the point, is that there was a stressful event. The body dumps this. The body is doing that for safety purpose. What we need to do to get back to that positive emotional state is to be able to move this through our system a little quicker. Okay, now I'm going to skip by some of this because you never know. Okay, so what I'm going to do here for just our last few minutes is talk about some of the research that I've been conducting in this area. And the first one was, and I call these things that we've just described, by the way, I call these sources of renewal. How do we renew ourselves as leaders? And how do we help those around us to renew themselves? Because it's not just about you when you're the leader. It's about helping other people reach their potential and putting them into a positive state of mind. So this renewal activity is not just what you do, this is what you ask others to do. Oh, I'll give you one. This is actually my favorite renewal activity is vacations. Take your vacation seriously. Because, if you're sitting on the beach in Jamaica and you're answering emails and texts from work, okay, what you're essentially doing is you're taking this opportunity to relax, this opportunity to immerse yourself, not in the woods this time, but on the beach and in a tropical setting with, maybe a nice exotic beverage. You're working. And all that stress keeps coming back to you. And part of the reason we do this is we think that we're so indispensable that we can't go be away from work for a week and a half, that the whole place is going to fall apart on us. Goldman Sachs is 130 years old. You know what? They're going to be just fine if you're gone for 10 days. Okay? They're going to be just fine if you're gone for a while. Plus, being on your phone all the time, telling people what to do is actually a kind of micromanaging. And people will notice that. So what a lot of organizations do now is when you go on vacation, they take away your company phone or they disable it for a period of time. And they shut down your email account and they tell you, go away. If there is an emergency, we will call the resort and get you on the phone. But there's probably not going to be an emergency, so go take this seriously. Then you should do the same thing with the people who report to you. Do not tell somebody, stay ready, stay online, because I never know when I'm going to need you. Okay, you let them go. And this really leads into this first study here that I'm talking about. Give me just a second. I accidentally closed something down. Just a sec, guys. Okay. Okay, so this study appeared, quite a while ago, but I still think it's relevant. Is that we asked 217 executives whether or not they engaged in renewal activities, and we described all these activities to them. 79% of them reported, yes, I engage in renewal activities. I do this in my life. I journal, I meditate, I pray, I exercise. Diet, of course, is another one of these that goes in here. Water is very important. Okay, drink 36 ounces of water. I don't care whether you want it or not. Drink water, not tea, not soda, not anything else. Those are not the fluids that help your body process, but water. Okay, so 79% said, yeah. I do a lot of renewal activity. Okay, only 50% said that they encouraged the people that reported themselves to engage in these. Wait, let me get this straight. So you think that this is important for you to do, but you're 30% less likely to encourage the people who report to you to do it. So if Iman happened to report to me, which is actually the opposite, I report to Iman, but I engage in these renewal activities, but I don't tell Iman, you need to do these things. You need to build these into your life. And what can I do to help build these into your life? What I'm saying is this is important for me, but I don't really care about Iman. Okay? That these are things that make me perform better, but I don't really care whether or not they, Iman does them or not. What kind of hypocrisy is that, right? What kind of a hypocrite would I be to say that this is good for me, but I don't really care that much whether other people can do it? And only 35% of them have said that they championed meaningful such company renewal programs. Okay, so that they actually went out there and said, hey, the evidence is clear. This stuff is good. It leads to performance. It leads to happiness and performance. People wanting to come to work and people performing well. We need to do this across our entire country, company. Only 35% said that I went out and proposed this and tried to get something done in the organization. Okay, that's pretty big. I'm not going to report this next study. Okay, I like these two. One of them is forthcoming in the California Management Review. So the idea here is, give me just a second, is that there's three kinds of labor in the world. There are three kinds of labor. There's intellectual labor, right? Because we usually think of labor as physical labor. Okay, so there's physical labor, but there's also intellectual labor, and intellectual labor takes a lot of work. Okay. And then there is emotional labor, because emotions are hard. Okay, you're tired after being very emotional, right? It's taken a toll on you. And as I said earlier, you've got to manage your own emotions. Now, Iman's got to manage it when he comes into the office and he's mad about something. He's got to manage that. He's got to say, okay, here's this emotion that I have, but I'm going to hold it back. Okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to act positive, even though I don't feel positive. I'm going to act energetic, even though I don't feel energetic. Okay? Even right now, by the way, I'll point out, I didn't sleep well last night. Okay, just one of those nights, I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning reading, just couldn't get to sleep. Finally didn't get a lot of sleep. You know what, folks? I'm tired right now. Okay, I'm tired, but I'm putting that aside. Right, I'm trying to work hard here, because the more I work hard, the more you can see this, the more interested you might be, which means I'm increasing your possibility of learning. Okay, and hopefully, this has been a pretty positive presentation, with a lot of smiling and a few little jokes here and there that is also putting you in a good mood. Okay, so that's emotional labor. Okay. So executives, people high up in the organization, report that they spend 59% of their day in emotional labor, 31% in intellectual labor, and 50% in physical labor. So successful executives, we're talking about C-suite people at this time, we're talking about senior vice presidents, CEOs, managing directors. These people are clearly successful. And what they do is say, for me to be successful, I have to spend about 60% of my day managing mine and other people's emotions, client emotions, other employee emotions, other executives' emotions, okay? 31% intellectual, 20% physical. Now let's go down to the middle manager level. Okay? Let's look back at physical labor first off. And you can see they report spending about the same amount of time in physical labor as do the C-suite executives. But now look at these other two. Middle managers report spending only 22% of their time in emotional labor and 60% of their time in intellectual labor. So they're doing exactly the opposite of what successful executives are doing. Maybe that's why they're not in the executive ranks, because they're not spending their time doing the most important thing of the day, which is managing emotional labor. Now, maybe, of course, those middle managers will learn this as they move up in the organization. And someday they might actually become executives because they've learned that managing emotions is the most important thing that they do in their day. But still, fascinating data. Okay? And then in the same study, we asked people to identify those in their organizations that they see as leaders. And then ask, well, for that person, what do you think they spend their time doing? Emotional, intellectual, or physical? And if somebody's been identified as a leader, sure enough, everybody else in the organization says that they spend their time in emotional labor, most of their time in emotional labor. So real clear, when we look at an organization, we think about what success means in an organization, and we think about what being a leader means in an organization, we are looking at emotion. And then one other thing before I wrap up, and I like doing this today, just put this study under review, is we asked, I think we had 890 somewhere people respond to this. Let's see, we all about 60% men, 40% women, 20 different countries represented. And these were all people at the senior executive level. And we asked this simple question. Think back over your life and career to who has played a profound role in shaping who you are and helping you develop into the person you wanted to be. Think of a specific story that captures his or her impact. And we had them write this story. And we had them send those stories. And I think, like I said, we had around 840 responses or so. And I ran this through a sentiment analysis program called NVIDIA, which is kind of like those word cloud programs, but it's much, much more sophisticated. And we also had some doctoral students code this. And sure enough, when people tell stories about leaders that had an impact on their life, they tell stories about how that leader made them feel, not how that leader made them think. Not how that leader helped them solve a problem, but how that leader made them feel competent, courageous, decent, ethical, okay? Made them feel that they were capable of doing something they didn't know that they were capable of doing. So what do we remember about leadership? We remember emotion. That's what we take away from it. And then this leads to a return to the final point, which is that at the end of the day, leadership is an emotional relationship. It is what we do. It is what we think. It is what we remember. It is what moves us and enlightens us and inspires us and lifts us. Okay? And that's what we're looking for. So that's what I've got. Iman, how do you want to go next here?
So we're going to open up for questions here, and for a couple of minutes for questions here. So if you have some questions, please write them down, and we go from there. But let me start with a question for you as people kind of formulate their questions and write it. First of all, this has been an exceptional presentation, absolutely fantastic. You've hit home in a lot of things here, but I go back with something that you ended. We feel before we think. You said it multiple times, and you underline it as very important. COVID-19 has hit, and a lot of people have felt the ramifications of it. And now they're starting to process the thinking here. Give us some of your insights into this and kind of what you have seen in terms of your executive consulting, students, colleagues, friends, loved ones. You know, you have a lens that a lot of people can see, but you see through. What have you noticed? What insights can you share with us?
Yeah, so just finished another study, sent it out to my agent. He's trying to place it, and we did a large-scale study and found out real simple that since COVID, people feel more irritable, more uncertain, and more antagonistic. Okay, so those are all emotions. So what has COVID done? It's provided a kind of existential threat where things we took for advantage, and we're talking about our own safety here, right? We're talking about our own survival. We're talking about whether we have a job or not, and whether or not we're going to be able to pay our mortgage, okay? This is a deep and serious threat in the human psyche. And so nobody had ever really demonstrated that. And people talk about it, but nobody had really demonstrated it. And so one of the central things, can't quite get my head around this, is what we need to do as leaders in order to deal with this agitation, this irritability, this uncertainty when people come back. Because what it means is that their safety needs are not now paramount. Right now, I'm not going to go into Abraham Maslow, right, who had this hierarchy about the needs, okay? But your first set of needs is your physiological, right? We need food, we need water, we need things like that. And at the beginning of COVID, we were worried about that, right? All the toilet paper is gone, all the bottled water is gone. And so we were literally worried about our, all the frozen foods were gone. The only meat left in the meat case was, you know, like beef tongue or something like that. So we were literally worried about our physiological needs. Now, it became pretty clear pretty quick that that was not a big concern. Our next level of needs up is our safety needs. And I think we're still dwelling there. That's where we're at, and that's what needs to be addressed. That's why a lot of people don't want to go back to the office, is they're worried about their safety needs, and that they'd rather work in this kind of a context. Now, our next level of needs are social needs, and social needs are being hugely eroded by Zoom. Okay? Because we're not in the office, we're not sitting in the conference room. Ayman and I, we have somebody interviewing for professorship in our department today. Normally, we would be in the room with this person. Ayman and I just had an interview with her. He and I would be in a room with this person. We'd be able to see so much more about them and their personality and who they were by being in that setting. And we missed a little bit of it, right? I mean, you know, you can't really pick that up. You don't know as much as you do about who that person is than if they were in your class, or not in your class, but in the conference room with you. And so our social needs are being eroded by this too, much less our competency needs, and then our highest level of needs, which is self-affirmation, self-actualization rather. And so what this did was take us from being at the top of our need level all the way down to almost the bottom. Okay? Where safety is what we're thinking about. And so that's the prime thing that leaders have to do today, is to provide safety. We've taken all of these steps, and that's why we're seeing these controversies around some CEOs, some organizations requiring that you've demonstrated that you've had the vaccine 2 times, not just once. Right now, they're only using those 2, not the booster, is because I want to show everybody we got a safe environment. And then we've got, of course, a whole group of people who say, I don't want to take this. And is that ground for letting me go or not? So it's a very, very complex issue, but I would say that's what it really comes down to.
Let me follow up on this, Dr. Bailey here. It's something that's in the media that you've also written a lot of them. And one of your most downloaded articles in Google was about this here. Is this workplace situation, you know, the employees in the workplace and what's happening here. And you have a lot of knowledge about this. I use the word, the big resignation that's happening, going back to work, commuting, and people are struggling with all these things here. And you've seen it all manifest itself in different ways here. How do we handle all of this? It's all coming at once here. And maybe you can share a little bit about the article that was just published that's very heavily cited and in the news and in Google as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna find that and put it in the chat as I'm talking here. I think I've got it up somewhere, but if not, I can find it really quick. So yeah, this came out a couple months ago in Harvard Business Review, and it's currently #1 on the Google positioning metrics. And I got to tell you, people either loved me or hated me from this. I literally got threats, email-based threats from people who thought this was horrible. And what I did in the paper was essentially argue that commuting is good for you, right? The piece is actually called That Dreaded Commute is Actually Good for Your Health. And the idea here, and now I'm putting this in Google for everyone, or excuse me, not in Google for everyone, but
Zoom, yeah, in the chat.
Yeah, I thought I just did it.
Yeah, you did. We see it.
You can see it. Okay, thanks. Is that commuting is a ritual. And rituals are important. They've been important in societies for all time, whether they were rituals around harvest time, whether they were rituals around equinoxes, spring, fall equinoxes, whether they were religious rituals. Rituals have been a part of our life throughout all time. A baseball player goes through a ritual when they come up to bat, right? They do exactly the same thing when they come up to bat. And the idea of a ritual is to sort of prepare you for the day. And that drive in, or you can bike in, whatever you use to commute. You can take the metro, you can take a commuter train, whatever it is. That allows you to prepare for your day. So when you're on your way in, you're thinking about your day. I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm meeting with this new candidate today. What questions might I have for her? And I know I'm going to be meeting, Ayman's going to be part of that meeting. And I know Ayman tends to like this kind of a question. And so I need to make sure that I give Ayman a fair opportunity to ask the kind of questions that he wants to ask. So I'm prepping myself for my work day. And then I do that. And then when I turn around and go home, I'm prepping myself for my home. I'm prepping myself for my children, for my spouse, what's going to happen then. And what's really taking place is this ritual is allowing a transfer of selves, the home self and the work self. Okay, as Erving Goffman tells us in the presentation of self in everyday life, is that we've got certain selves and they shouldn't be meaning. Some of you have been told this your whole life. Don't bring your work home with you. Leave it at work. When you're at home, right? That's not what's happening when your work is right there in the bedroom, is right down in the basement or in a closet that you cleared out. Your work and your home selves have met, and they are divided, and they will and are causing tensions. There's also this idea of just having some alone time. I mean, so you're riding that train, you put your beats on, you put on your favorite podcast or a little Stevie Wonder or whatever it is. This is the only alone time you might get during the day. Okay? So that it turns out that commuting has all of these positive elements for us. Now, I don't think we're going to go back 100% full time, except for in certain occupations where that's required. Okay, in the military, so forth. Jamie Dimon of Morgan Stanley has said, everybody is coming back in the office. We're banking. We have to be here. We have to be able to talk. Nobody does informal talks via Zoom. Okay, we do meetings via Zoom. I don't just write Ayman and say, hey, you want to chat? Let's get on a Zoom. That doesn't happen. It happens in the hallway all the time, okay? But it doesn't happen in that way. And so, where was I going here? So there's all of these benefits to this activity. I understand that there's a smaller echo footprint if we don't commute as much. I understand a lot of people consider their commute to be wasted time. Although, again, the comments I got from this paper, about half of the people said, you're exactly right. I miss my commute. That was my time during the day. That prepared me for work. That did all this. And then the other half of the people thought I was a monster and said, this is terrible. How dare you say things like this? And okay, sorry about that. I didn't turn that off. So we're obviously going to go back to a blended model. One would think most of us are going to be back 5 days a week. That's fine. But if your organization says 3 times a week, that's good for you. Okay, you can still spend your Mondays, Fridays, or whatever kind of staggered sense they have at home. But you need time there. You need to bond with your colleagues, get a sense of collegiality, that sense of citizenship I was talking about. Those things just don't come through this particular electronic venue. So it has to happen.
We're a little bit over time here, but I know we need to come back for another one. This is just an amazing conversation, and it's also very timely here. Part of our communication to our members worldwide and to the students is we raise the word harmony. Harmony was used a lot in the communications here. Is there harmony forthcoming between COVID-19, the relationship between leadership, the people that on their team, the work environment? What do you see as a potential way of harmony? Commuting is one of them, saying, let's get back to some of our rituals here or traditions here, because that creates a balance. But what might that be? What else might that be if we can never really 100% go back? But what's the future like?
Yeah, well, there's the harmony and the kind of commuting that I talked about that can bring you this sense of harmony because you are on the road, literally, figuratively, whatever, with those earphones on. And now you feel harmonious and part of the world, and it helps to relax you and put you in the proper mind frame to be a good professional on one side and then to be a good family person on the other. Okay, so that's a kind of harmony. Another kind of harmony is the balance between work and home in terms of using these new technologies and being able to spend some time at home and having every Friday off. On Fridays, nobody goes into the office. And so you can leave maybe a little earlier for your weekend, whatever it happens to be. And so that creates a little work-life balance kind of harmony. There's also going to have to be a shift in the kind of leadership. So to put this real simple, and there's another study that's out recently that shows that in face-to-face, when we're at the office, the most effective leader is a task-oriented one that is constantly looking at deadlines, constantly aligning goals, looking a little over your shoulder, sort of motivating you. You got that done yet? You got that done yet? I want to see that. Where in an online and a remote work, we need more of a relationship management kind of leadership, which is passing off the responsibility that I trust you to do this because I can't oversee you all the time. I can't be there. I can't just, walk by your office and knock and say, hey, Iman, what's going on with this? Have you got this done yet? And so I think that there's going to be a shift of the kind of leadership in a way that is better suited for a remote area and also better suited for a younger generation, because millennials don't like it when baby boomers like me tell them what to do, right? They just recoil at it right away. If, let's say, I'm capable of learning and actually can be more delegating and these sort of things, I might help to balance that and achieve a better work harmony.
Dr. Bailey, this has been absolutely fantastic webinar, and it just felt like we just started a minute ago, and we're in it 75 minutes later here. So on behalf of the Department of Management and GW School of Business and the International Council for Small Business, thank you for your time. This has been very enlightening and impactful with a clear message that we need to look at these things and really spend some time rethinking the way we do things, because at the end, it's our body, our mind, and our well-being is at stake here. I want to leave the last words with you, with the last message to all our colleagues worldwide. This is actually live on Facebook, and we'll probably be sending it out via YouTube and other social medias here. So any comments or message you'd like to leave everybody?
I appreciate those. Thanks, everybody. And by the way, I put my email in there. Email me anytime you got a question. Right? I will be happy to respond.
Wonderful. So please reach out to Dr. Bailey. We'll be sending his slides and his communication here. And this is to be continued. Please all stay safe, And for you that celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving in the United States. And for those, have a wonderful rest of the week. And we look forward to connecting again. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, and thank everybody else.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you in a little bit in another one of these.